We hear a lot of perspectives on the Mankind podcast. Inclusion of a guest is not an endorsement of their views, and the opinions expressed here do not always represent the mission or values of the Mankind Project USA. This is Michael Russer, and you're listening to the Mankind podcast.
Looks like the rain has gone.
G'day and welcome to another episode of the Mankind Podcast, the show where we break the molds of modern manhood to prove that there's more than just one way to be a man. I'm your host, Brandon Clift, and welcome to the show that men can kind of get away from media's magnifying glass, a chance where we can have real conversations about the issues that are facing men, that are facing the world, so that we together as men can find a way to contribute to a better world. A more unified world, less us versus them kind of conversations and more together. And speaking of togetherness, today's guest, international speaker, author, and thought leader Michael Russer is here to talk all about intimacy. And this is all in relation to our previous episode in our Shadow series with Dr. Jolly Hamilton around the sexual shadow. Many of you will be thinking intimacy. Well, I don't associate intimacy with sex, and I get that, but a lot of people do. And so we're going to be navigating between physical, emotional, and having the conversations to hopefully fill in the gaps with conversations around, really our shadow selves, intimacy, all of our conditioning around sex and intimacy. So it's going to be a great conversation. But to give you some context on Michael, Michael is a prostate cancer survivor who was left completely impotent as a result of his treatments. Yet it was because of his impotence that he and his partner discovered an entirely new approach to emotional, physical, and spiritual intimacy that far exceeds anything either experienced prior to when things were working, quotation marks, correctly. Michael's mission now is to help men, women, and couples everywhere to achieve extraordinary intimacy on all levels, and he is here today to share with us his story. Michael, mate, welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you, Brandon. It's an honor to be here. Thank you so much.
Mate, the honor is all mine. So first things first, intimacy. Let's kind of dive into that and get a kind of bird's eye view of what your understanding is of intimacy.
Well, there's before the prostate cancer and then after prostate cancer. I came from a 26-year marriage where the last 11 years of that marriage were essentially sexless, but it was also lacking any form of intimacy of any kind, and certainly no emotional intimacy as well. And we stayed together for the sake of the children. And when my youngest son went off to college, that's when I ended the marriage and decided that I needed to do a lot of work on myself. And the biggest part of that was opening up my heart. And I was very kind of driven, shut down kind of individual. And I knew I couldn't continue that way. And the process of going through that opening, which, by the way, a big part of this, I should mention, 2 weeks before I met my life partner, Jacqueline, who will be celebrating our 9th anniversary coming up here in October. 2 weeks prior to that, I went through the New Warrior training adventure, not having a clue what it was about. Someone suggested, well, you ought to go through this, and it was absolutely transformative because my heart was shut down to half the human population, men. I was fine with women, but not men. And I know for a fact that if I hadn't done that work, there's no way that Jacqueline and I probably would even still be together, because how can you have a deep connecting emotional and sexual and even spiritual intimacy if your heart is shut down to half the population? So it was very fortuitous that I went through that process before she and I met. And so to answer your question, what is intimacy? Intimacy, I see intimacy as a deep, abiding connection between two human beings where there's no judgment, no expectations, no attachments. And in the process of doing that, you give each other space to be exactly who you are. And in that process, you get to connect at that level, which is often much deeper than most people I think are actually used to, because I can certainly speak for myself. I had so many masks on, I had so much armor up, and how can I connect with all that, right? And so I had to go through a process of really tearing that stuff down and allowing myself to be, to connect in that way. So intimacy for me is a form of deep, abiding connection, without the judgments, without the expectations, without the distractions or attachments. And it's, again, I can only speak for myself, but I find it very centered in the heart, not in the head, not in my groin. It's in my heart. And when, and Jacqueline and I were very fortunate. We weren't even attracted to each other when we first met. I mean, we just weren't. And it took us a while to become friends. And from the friendship, it evolved into a life partnership, which has been extraordinary.
Wow. Well, mate, your description of intimacy, I couldn't help but notice that a lot of what you were sharing was very much in reference to self. Right. And it's so common that I hear people talk about craving intimacy in their lives, and it's always in reference to finding a partner, going out and finding someone else to share that intimacy with. But I'm curious, like, where does intimacy begin? Do you have to find that person to create intimacy?
No, I don't think so. I have friends that I'm intimate with on an emotional level, right? And a mutual friend of ours, Boyce, and I consider him and I to be very intimate friends at an emotional level. We share that level of connection, and so. Which, by the way, never would have happened before in WTA, not by a long shot. I think it's possible to experience intimacy, even if the other person isn't reciprocating. Okay, it's because I think again, I can only speak for myself. The sense of intimacy is the willingness to have this connection, which means removing the barriers, removing the not allowing fear to put up the walls. And it's a sense of connection. And now they can choose to accept or not accept. That's up to them. And I don't think that can be forced. I don't think it should be forced. But when you have a situation where both are in that direction, both working that way, it truly is extraordinary, and it's beyond anything I've ever experienced before. And but I also think that if you create, it's like, imagine two people getting ready to go into battle, and then one of them suddenly drops all their armor, drops their weapon, drops their armor, and holds the other in their heart. Now, they may end up getting slaughtered, but not always. Maybe the other person will see, well, maybe I don't have to protect myself so much. Maybe I can be vulnerable and allow someone in. And so it creates that invitation. But the important thing, I think, to realize is that it doesn't necessarily mean the other person will accept that invitation. But I do believe it starts here, right here first. Because if you go into it saying, well, I'll do this if you do it. Well, that's a condition. And that does not foster the kind of intimacy we're talking about here.
Yeah, because in your TED Talk, and for the listeners, check out Michael's TED Talk. It is hilarious and deep and emotional. It's the full gambit and spectrum of emotions. It's called Creating Extraordinary Intimacy in a Disconnected World. I'll have that linked in the show notes. And in that, you reference intimacy as into me see, which tells me that intimacy can only begin with self first, right? So all these people that are trying to find someone else to create intimacy with, yes, but it's like one can't come before the other, right?
That's right. From my experience. Yeah. And our culture is such that, we see these people fall in love in the movies, and, oh my God, their life's going to be spectacular because they're just so in love. And what they never show in most movies is like 3 years later, and they hate each other. And, I really believe, and it's been our experience, meaning Jacqueline and mine's experience, that when you deliberately practice, and it is a practice for us, intimacy, every day, every moment, it only gets better and deeper and richer and in ways that you can't possibly predict or imagine. Now, I remember I have a client that once shared with me that, he wasn't having as much sex as he would like. And I says, I asked him a leading question. Well, would you like to change that? Duh. And I says, all right. I says, how badly do you want it? He said, what do you mean? I said, you willing to go places that will scare the living crap out of you? And he thought, well, what do you mean? I says, it means dropping all your expectations, all your fears around this, all your barriers and your walls. Are you willing to do that? He goes, yeah. I says, okay. So the first thing we did was we went over what, I described to him what being present was. What is presence? And I told him presence is this deep state of awareness without judgment, expectation, distraction, or attachment. And I says, really get there. This is not the ego. This is something bigger. This is something beyond ego that you're just aware. And that creates that sense of presence and an invitation to connection. So I showed him how to drop into presence very quickly. I says, okay, now what I want you to do, and never tell your wife that you're doing this. Don't tell her you're being coached by me. I says, what you do is this. I says, 5 times a day minimum, I want you to stop her, look into her left eye, and I'll explain the left eye thing here in a minute. Look into her left eye and be totally present and tell her you love her. And hold that gaze just for a moment. No quick pecks. Oh, I love you, dear. No, I love you. It's 5 times a day. And his response was, 5 times? I says, dude, Jacqueline and I do it at least 20 times a day. And we continue to today. And it's not because, we're checking it off the list. It's because we can't help ourselves. So it was tough. It was tough for him to do that because it meant dropping those defense mechanisms, right? Because when you get into a situation where you're not getting what you want in a relationship, we often then withhold ourselves, right? Yeah. And that won't work if you're looking for intimacy. And so he did this. He practiced, and eventually got up to 5 times. And then things shifted so dramatically that his wife finally asked, what the hell's going on? And he had to tell her. But and this does work, but it is a process that insists, at least from my experience, on extreme vulnerability. Allowing yourself to be totally vulnerable and authentic. Yeah. And that's a tough place for a lot of people.
It's remarkably tough. And for context, you heard Michael before reference New Warrior Training Adventure, or what we shorten as the NWTA, being something that obviously helped him trust and begin to form relationships with men. That transition for a lot of men, like a lot of what gets in the way of that transition, let's just say, or gets a man to go to the New Warrior Training, is the fear of things becoming different than they've ever been. And so it's very easy to say that, intimacy begins with just being vulnerable and the saying I love you part. But for some men, that can seem like Everest to even begin that process, because they have this relationship with someone that they negotiated maybe 20 years ago. This is what relationship for us is going to look like. And somewhere deep down, needs aren't being met. That getting to that point, I mean, that's why it's important to have a coach. That's why it's important to have guidance. It's such a challenge for so many men to kind of begin those first steps. And we're only now starting to see, since the pandemic, new warrior trainings start to pop up on the calendars, right? We're only now, after like a 2-year hiatus, now starting to see those trainings come back. But Michael, what do you say to that person that might be from a more rural area, that may not have a support network, that may not have other people inside their sphere to have these conversations with, where these concepts could seem so foreign to them and so terrifying?
Well, that is a challenge. And I think it depends on how badly you want it. And what's interesting is I think for men, based on my experience, their sense of something's amiss has to do with their sex life, right? Yeah, we're just not having sex like we used to. It's not as good, and it she doesn't seem to be as interested, and I'm horny all the time, whatever.
And let's just paint the very clear picture that we know of society today, that very much, I mean, we spoke about this with the last episode with Jolie, is that sex is something that has been so engendered for men to be of a status marker. Mm-hmm. A lot of men listening can remember being 15 to 40. Did you get laid on the weekend? Just finally getting laid, and then wanted to tell all your buddies and, give all the details. And it's something from a very early age that goes from taboo to somehow being accepted, but also on that fringe. And then on that fringe, we are expected, our manliness is expected to be determined based on our sexual prowess or performance. Right,
performance. Yeah. So, that's a charged word. Sure. Women, on the other hand, see intimacy as a form of connection. They want that emotional, connection, and most of them. And there are exceptions. I mean, I've run into women where they're more driven towards the physical than the emotional. They have a lot of, I'll call, for lack of a better way of saying it, masculine traits that way. And there's always exceptions. And but usually the complaint starts as, it's just not, our sex life just isn't like what it used to be. And it's usually starts at when there's a breakdown or a deterioration of the emotional intimacy. When two people get together, they're usually on their best terms. The pretense, they're wearing pretense all over the place because they want to show their best, right? Well, that's not who we really are. By definition, that's a mask, and that is a great recipe for problems down the road, because eventually that mask has to come off, and you're like, I can't be like this all the time. They're going to become irritable. They're going to make, they'll say things they shouldn't have said, and so on. And so there needs to be a mechanism, at least from my experience, in place to bring back that connection. Now, Jacqueline and I are very strong-willed people, and we have our moments. And but what we also do is we have a process that when either one of us feels a charge related to our relationship, we stop immediately. Whatever we're doing, we stop and we talk about it. And it says, what's going on here? And we would often say, what you just did or what happened here hurt my ego. Now, that sounds silly, except think about this. What we're doing is we're acknowledging that the ego is the reactive self, and it's not really truly who we are. And I've made this statement in the past. I don't know how true it is, but it works for us, is that the heart can't be broken. The heart can never be torn, shred, stapled, mutilated, or anything else like that. The heart is always there shining, unless it's eclipsed by the ego, which is easily trashed. and it's usually the egos that are having the conflict. And even with that knowledge, it can be very difficult. And because the ego saying, well, she did this or he did this.
Because the ego, and again, I'm very elementary in my understanding of ego, but the ego generally assumes control over the survival mechanisms that we put in place, right?
Well, it's a survival mechanism that assumes control over the ego, actually. Oh, right. The ego is the way it manifests. So the built-in survival mechanism, that's exactly what it is. The built-in survival, everything goes back to survival. Everything goes back to existential crisis. And so it can get touchy, but there are ways to do that. And I've said I'm sorry many times and meant it, because I can be tough to be with sometimes, and as hard as that might be to believe.
Well, I think that's important to mention, because it's natural that if I want to create deeper intimacy with my partner of however many years, whatever's getting in the way of that is going to make sure that this is not a linear process. Mm-hmm. And my understanding from my however many years on the planet is going to inform my beliefs around sex and intimacy.
Right.
So is my partner's.
Mm-hmm.
So there's this element of you, there's this element of me, and there's this element of us.
Yes.
And I love that connection exercise that you're talking about. It sounds very like kind of Gottman, John Gottman Institute, right? Reconnection exercise, right? Of kind of identifying and looking at it from like a camera's view. Like if there was a camera rolling of the event, remove the emotions, right? If there was a camera filming the event, what was the objective reality, what was said?
Right.
And then this is how my ego interpreted that thing, and then it's related to this trigger. So I'm actually not upset with you so much as you just triggered me into something that happened in my past.
Right. That's really well put. That is really well put. And it usually is a trigger. And I get triggered all the time. I mean, oh my God.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah. I mean, I really, really do. And I can be a very reactive personality, and I've got a lot of energy still. And it's not pleasant to be around when I get reactive. I mean, I'll just be honest with you. And I mean, I can bring Jacqueline down here and she's, oh yeah.
Well, and I think all this to say that for those listening is this process is going to be messy.
Mm-hmm.
And so long as, but I think that's this thing that always comes up in the show is the difference between willingness and wantingness.
Yes.
I want to have sex. I want to get laid.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I want to bang my partner, right? Whatever language you use. But there's the wantingness, but are you willing to do the work?
Mm-hmm.
I want intimacy and deeper connection with my partner, but am I willing to go those places that are terrifying for me? You know, we talk about sexual shadow in the previous episode, that and this frame of reference, right, that informs our feelings around sex. We also understand that we might be talking to someone who has been sexually harassed or assaulted in their lives. I've got someone close to me who's been married to someone for 20 plus years. Only now, since the Me Too movement came out, did they find out that in fact his partner was also Me Too.
Mm-hmm.
And that, I think it's having these conversations, these connections on this kind of level is going to help us explore what is possible sexually. And I'm saying this from having friends that have been sexually assaulted in their lives by people very close to them, but they now get to experience extraordinary sexual and intimate connections with their partners when society tells us, or people around us expect, that sex and intimacy now has just been tarnished for the rest of our lives.
Yeah. No, it's not true. And I know somebody exactly in that situation. And she was abused by an uncle at a very young age. And but she has faced it. She has forgiven him. And she is able to experience extraordinary intimacy. Mm-hmm. The scar will always be there.
Yeah,
but it doesn't have to always in some way negatively influence your outcome and how you experience life. It will always be there, but it doesn't have to create such a negative cloud over everything. That I know for a fact because I've witnessed it.
No doubt. I've been reading recently about this different approach to looking at scars and looking at our scars as a celebration of them. Look what we survived. Look what we conquered. Look what we overcame.
And look what we've learned. Look at what we've learned in the process, because without those scars, we wouldn't have learned those things. Without my impotence, there's no way I would have had the life I have today.
Well, and let's go there, Michael, because you're 69 years young. And I mean that because as long as I've known you, you've always just had this kind of fuck yeah attitude.
Yeah.
With everything we've done together. And a lot of what we've had to work through together has not been fun, but you've always approached it head on.
Yeah, I've got a son who I think is a little bit older than you, and I am younger than he is. And I mean that in all due respect to him, but he's like my dad. He says, "Dad, what'd you do now?" I says, "Wait a minute." I says, "I'm the dad, you're the son. Let's make sure we understand that." I have a very young attitude. I always have, very playful. Yeah. And unfortunately, Jacqueline's very playful, because if one of us was just playful, that might be frustrating.
Yeah. You know? It's like a little cat trying to grab your ankles all the time.
Yes, right.
Well, and so, mate, 69 years of age, you've got this energy and this exuberance, and a lot of people that listening to this episode may not be aware that you have stage 4 prostate cancer still in your body and impacting your life and your health. And so this is perhaps a scar that hasn't formed yet. This is perhaps a wound that's still open. How do you choose to look at it?
Well, it's given me a number of gifts. That's the way I look at it. That the cancer has given me a number of gifts. The first is that we live every day to the fullest, every moment of every day to the fullest. So Jacqueline and I both work from home. She has her career, I have mine. And we walk the beach every day. We hike, we do everything we possibly can because we know time is short or can be. Right. And, I lost 5 other members of my family to various forms of cancer. I'm number 6 now. And so that awareness, and we talk about my mortality every day. Every day we're aware of it. And I know it is, from a life partner standpoint, it's very, very difficult for her. I would go insane if it was reversed, frankly. She is so strong. And so, we've both actually have done types of ceremonies, usually plant ceremonies and that sort of thing, to really get a sense of what it's like to die before it happens. Because
ayahuasca will do that.
Yes, it will. Yeah, ayahuasca. In fact, I'm going to be doing my 4th anniversary ayahuasca experience in August.
Wow.
And the first one changed my life. Ooh. And changed hers too. She became an event organizer and organized events for plant medicine in Santa Barbara, and people are still talking about them.
Wow.
And then 5-MeO DMT is I don't know if you've ever done that, but that if you want to know what it's like to die for about 10 minutes, your ego dissolves. There is no sense of I, and those experiences allowed me to accept the fact that this Michael, is going to cease to exist. Now, what happens after that, I'm not sure, but it's taken the stigma off of that. And so the first gift was to really be aware that every moment is precious. And you can fritter it away, you can argue it away, you can do whatever you want, or you can choose to experience it together and celebrate it. And that's why, before we went live here, I was telling you that we're going to be celebrating our 9th anniversary, but it feels like we've been together 30 years in a good way. And like, it's so packed with stuff. And that's the first gift. The second gift is my impotence. Now, this is going to be real. Like, what? Say, what did you just say? Yeah, my impotence was the second gift, because prior to my impotence, my erect penis kind of ran the show. And because when I got hard, man, that's all I thought about is I need relief and I need it now.
Wild man, carnal.
Wild man. Yeah. It's very visceral, very, very visceral. And for whatever reason, I was born with a pretty high sex drive. And and it's still there. But because of that, Jacqueline and I have explored ways of experiencing, after we developed the emotional intimacy, exploring different forms of physical intimacy that, how can I put this? That didn't even enter into not only the realm of possibility, that I didn't even know it was, I didn't know such things existed, those kinds of experiences. And as a result now, I have learned to receive in a way where I used to just give, the so-called performance. And I can't do that, fortunately. But now when it's my turn, I receive and just receive. And as a result, the first time it took us 3 months of sexual intimacy for me to actually have my first release. Because, I couldn't be hard. There was no prostate. There's no ejaculation, none of that. And I tried so hard, I started getting stress headaches, which is not fun during sex. No. And so one day I just said, screw it. I'm just going to receive. And then something amazing happened. I ended up having a full body orgasm that went on and on and on and on. And I said, this must be what a woman feels, because, oh my God, this is so far beyond any ejaculative orgasm that I ever had, including my 20s. It's like, oh my God, where'd that come from? And it's been like that ever since, including, and this is what emotional intimacy will do for you. Part of my treatment, my prostate cancer is technically termed metastatic castrate-resistant prostate cancer. And what castrate resistance means is that part of my treatment early on is they basically chemically castrated me, because the testosterone has been known to feed the prostate cancer. Well, sometimes the prostate cancer learns to get around that and grow despite not having. So there was a time, probably a couple of years, where I had zero testosterone for all intents and purposes. Yet I was still able to have those experiences, which is really unusual. But when you have that deep connection of emotional intimacy, and for me, it was, I got the most fulfillment, not on the release, but on the giving. And the selflessly giving. And that is where I received levels of fulfillment that it was just overflowing, and it still is. It's much more pleasurable for me to give than to receive, and the receiving's pretty awesome.
Mm. To give on a level that isn't just performance-based.
In fact, the word performance doesn't enter into our lexicon.
Yeah.
We talk about, replacing the word performance with presence. Mm. And we're very, very present for each other, and no expectations. And we're not doing this so you can get off or I can get off. We're doing this to give to each other. And whatever happens, happens. Mm. And it's interesting because sometimes, women have performance anxiety, by the way, at least from my experience, because one of the ways they show appreciation for the man's giving in a sexual way is having an orgasm or two. And And there's times when Jacqueline and when she's saying, "Oh, honey, I just don't think I can, come this time." I says, "Don't worry about it." I says, "Are you enjoying it?" Oh my God, yeah. Then don't even try. Just enjoy it. Invariably, about 20 seconds later, boom. Yeah, because she didn't try, right? She's not trying anymore. That's the performance thing. So if she's just present to it, if we're just present with each other, everything seems to take care of itself.
You mentioned with presence before, earlier in the interview, that it was no judgments, no expectations, no distractions.
And no attachments. Right. And centered in the heart. Centered in the heart. I see how that formula works. Well, I got to say, one of the most powerful moments in your TED Talk was when you talk about, the early stages of dating Jacqueline. Yes.
And having to share and own that you are impotent. And is she willing to continue a relationship?
Yeah. Oh, that was hilarious because we were friends. She was helping me. She's from South America, and she was helping me. I was on my way to Brazil, and we just met at this talk, and she said, "Would you like some help? Because if they hear you coming from North America, the price goes up, right?" And that was going to be So she was helping me, and then we discovered we both like to hike, so we became friends that way. And then one day she asked me, says, I like listening to live music. Do you want to come and maybe dance? I'm going, I haven't danced in like 20 years. And last time I did, 3 people laughed at me, one of them my ex-wife. And I said, that's it. I'm never dancing again. So we went, and I just sort of stood by. And then I saw this beautiful woman dance. Oh my God. And then I'm thinking, no. Don't even think about it. You're going to Brazil, man. Don't even think about it.
Yeah.
So she drove that night. And when she dropped me off, I gave her, just very like out of the blue, I just reached over and gave her a quick kiss on the lips. And she just like was surprised. And because she was done with men at that time, she had ended a marriage also. And well, she had to come over the next couple of days to do some final work on getting me the unit near the beach in Florianópolis, Brazil. And then as she was leaving, we kissed each other a little more emphatically, and then we knew we were in trouble. And we had to have the conversation. And at that point, she didn't know I had cancer, and she didn't know I was impotent.
Wow.
And I'm thinking, oh my God, how am I going to explain this without her bolting, right? And I'm thinking, she's going to look at her left wrist. You look at the time, this has been fun, but we'll be in touch. Or worse, she'll go, "Oh, you poor guy." Nobody wants to hear that.
No pity.
No. Oh God, no. So she came in the following weekend, and it's really interesting what happens when you have emotional intimacy. Prior to that, we really weren't that attracted to each other. But when I opened up the door for her to come in, for us to have this conversation, the air was just sucked out of my lungs. I was just, oh my God, she's so beautiful. It's just so interesting how that happens. And so she sat down, and I said, look, I explained my cancer. I says, look, I pointed down to my crotch, and I says, this isn't working, and it may never work. Are you open to exploring other ways? I didn't even know what that meant. I just knew that the usual way isn't going to likely work.
Sure.
And I'm almost like cringing. And she goes, sure. Sure. Okay. And I booked the room at a very nice resort, like 5 nanoseconds later.
So what I want to do is I want to leave this as a tease for the listeners to check out the TED Talk, because how the penis pump comes into the story is my favorite part. I've never laughed and also hurt at the same time when you go into the details of the penis pump, which in fact makes an appearance on the TED Talk too, which much to the amusement of the audience. Yeah. Michael, I tell you what, mate, in just the short time we've spent together, this has been so deeply insightful for me, and I'm sure the listeners as well, about understanding the difference between both intimacy and sex, and then deeper elements of intimacy, both emotionally, physically, and even on the spiritual element. I think it's so important to create those differentiators so that I, as a man, and so that anyone of any gender can start to begin their journey of creating that intimacy. And of course, first for self, right? To find that intimacy with self, to then co-create that with someone else.
Yeah.
Mate, before we wrap up, is there anything that you'd like the anyone listening to take away, or anything extra that you feel like you want to mention?
Yeah. It's really very simple. It's just not easy. That if you want to create a connection, an intimate connection, and again, define intimacy as that connection, and it starts in the heart. If you really want to create that connection with your current partner, or you're not with somebody now, but somebody you'd like to have as a partner eventually, you practice being present. And that is that deep state of awareness as a witness, without judgment, expectations, distractions, or attachments, and centered in your heart. Just visualize that. And it means more listening than talking. And by listening, I mean really listening. And then if you're with a partner and you want that deeper sense of connection, try doing what I told my client to do. And that is 3-4 times a day. Stop, become present, look into their left eye, which from my experience is the window to the heart, and tell them you love them without any thought of reciprocation. Without any thought of reciprocation. That becomes, in my experience, the purest form of invitation for a deep connection that will impact your experience of that other person on the emotional, physical, and yes, spiritual level. And that is something that everybody can do. It's something that not everybody is willing to do. But if you're willing to take that chance, I think, from my experience, it will completely transform your relationship.
Beautiful, mate. More listening, less talking, more feeling, less thinking. Mm-hmm. Sounds like a great way to get to know the self.
Yes.
This process and
create that invitation for the other person. And again, there's no guarantee that they will accept the invitation, but what it does do is increases the probability tremendously. Because they know they're not being judged. They know there is no expectations on them. And you are there without distraction or attachment to any outcome. That's pretty powerful. You practice that. And it's hard for the other person not to reciprocate. Let me put it that way.
Yeah. Sounds like it'll also potentially expedite the inevitable if they're just not the one.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And it's important to if you want a relationship that's going to last, it is important to find someone who is compatible and who is open to that. And yeah, exactly. That's well put. You'll know, right? And then don't be attached to making it happen, because it'll either will happen or it won't.
Yeah. Well, man, you're a phenomenally busy person. I know you keep yourself busy, and so I appreciate you taking the time to share this space with me, Michael. Are you still coaching?
Yeah, occasionally I do. Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
But they, it's just like, it's like having intimacy with a partner. They have to be willing to do the work. And if they're not, I bless them. I say, fine, that's great. I'm not the guy for you.
Sure.
I'm not going to browbeat you. You're either going to do the work and we'll work together on this or not. And that's fine. But they really need to be willing to do the work.
Sure. Willing to stand in the fire.
Stand in the fire. And the funny thing is the fire's of their own making. And so it is not something external that's going to burn them. Yeah. But once they realize that, then they'll start seeing results pretty quickly.
Awesome, mate. Well, how can they find out more information?
Oh boy, I haven't done that in a while. I don't have a website, which is really interesting because I used to be known as Mr. Internet. I would just say have them email me at mjrusser@gmail.com if they're interested in having a discussion with me. As you said, I'm doing a lot of things right now, but if somebody really wants to connect with me, I am more than happy to have that conversation with them. So mjrusser, RUSSER @gmail.com would be the best way.
We'll make sure it's in the show notes, mate.
All
Beautiful. Right. Great to spend this time with you, mate, and build this intimacy with you as well.
Same here, Brandon. Same here. Thank you so much. Thanks for the opportunity.
Yeah, mate. Pleasure is all mine. And for those of you that have been joining us today, thank you for becoming a part of these conversations. This show is not going to just gloss over popular conversation topics of the era of the day as it pertains to men. We're going to have courageous conversations. We're going to touch on the things that a lot of us want to know more about, want to explore more, but are afraid to because of the taboo nature of said topics and conversations. So for you, even just being here and listening tells me that you have an open mind and an open heart to potentially looking at the world in a different way and looking at your place in it in a different way. So to the listeners, thank you again. Oh, and 10,000 downloads. Thank you for that. That's been so phenomenal to see, and just blow our expectations out the water for this podcast. It shows us that people are willing to lean into this stuff. So again, thank you so much for being here. Michael, you the man. And we'll see you guys in the next episode. This has been the Mankind Podcast, produced in association with the Mankind Project USA. I have been your host, Brandon Clift, and I personally want to thank our guests for joining us today and imparting their wisdom from their experiences in this amazing journey called life. And of course, I want to thank you, the listener, because through your attention and your support, you make it a heck of a lot easier for us to let men out there in the world know that they are not alone and that there is more than one way to be a man. Special thanks, of course, goes to my incredible team, Marketing and Communications Director Boyson Hodgson, producer and editor of this episode, Michael Russer, who makes me sound so much more intelligent than I actually am, so of course, special kudos goes there. And if you've been enjoying the music throughout this episode and all of our episodes, check out Jim, Donovan, and the Sun King Warriors. I have links to them in the show notes. Now, the fee for this episode is simple. If you found gold and insights that you believe could benefit your loved ones and those you care about, be sure to share it with them. And of course, remember that life doesn't happen to us. It happens for us, so long as we rip the pen out of fate's hand and become the author of our own story. So my friend, pick up the pen and we'll see you next week. Lots of love.